Woodsong by Gary Pualsen, Chapter 8. The wind seemed to scream as we cut through the night. It had been a cold week, 53 below one night, 45 below the next two, and never rising above 20 below, with a wild wind out of the northeast the whole time. Somehow we had gotten caught out in the worst part of the weather. The true cold had found us 80 miles out. I was not dressed for deep cold, and I was worried about the dogs. 2 of them had frostbitten ears. As I treated them with ointment, I decided to hole up until the weather eased a bit. I thought overnight. I rigged a snow shelter and made a lean-to with a tarp and dug snow caves for the dogs, and we holed up to wait until the worst part of the cold had passed. We had some dog food and about 20 pounds of fat for the dogs, and I had one lovely can of Chef Boyardee ravioli. We hunkered in for the duration. I lasted a day, looking at the ravioli, drinking hot tea. I had 1 tea bag, which I used over and over. Hunger set in, and I used 2 small pieces of the dog's fat and mixed it with half the ravioli for a stew. It tasted wonderful, and I ate it, waited another half day, and ate the rest. And it wasn't so bad. The wind roared, but the dogs were covered. I fed them twice and recovered them, and it could have gone on. I had plenty of wood for fire, and the wind was away from me. But on the morning of the 3rd day, I became violently ill. I thought it might be the flu when I could still think, or food poisoning from the pieces of fat. Then it didn't matter. I went into a high fever with delirium. I began to hallucinate. While hallucinating, somebody arrived, a man I did not know, and he helped me harness my team. The wind was still bad, and the dogs did not want to leave their warm snow caves, but my helper gave me a hand. He was a short man, thick through the middle with curved, sloping, strong shoulders, and a great confidence and knowledge of dogs. He shook the dogs out of the snow and made them stand in the wind, and twice looked at me and smiled. His face was flat and oval, and his eyes were gentle. He signaled me to go, motioning with his hands to move the team, to get the dogs to run. I caught the sled as it went by, and I think I tried to wave at him as we left in the dark. I know, looking back on it, that it was a hallucination. I can sit and think of it and know that, but it was still real. I don't remember the whole run. It was a series of nightmares, of dreams mixed with reality, of scenes and movements and pictures. I tried to ride on the back of the sled, but I was too sick and kept falling, fumbling in the dark and cold and wind. I used some rope to tie myself to the sled and still fell many, many times. Each time the dogs would stop and let me get back on the sled. When it was finally too much and I couldn't stand, I crawled into the sled and wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, which the man had helped me pack, and let the dogs have me. I could not sleep, but kept going in and out of consciousness. Once, when I felt that we were stopped, I looked up out of the bag, and the same man who helped me leave the clearing, the Eskimo man, was pulling my lead dog out of a drift that had blown in over the trail. Again, when the dogs were straightened out and moving, he waved to me as the sled passed close to him. I waved back and reached for him, but could not touch him as the sled moved rapidly away. Through the long night we ran. It was very hard going for the dogs, fighting the wind and the snow, and I couldn't help them, lying half dead in the sled. Many times they were stopped, hung up in deep snow, were trying to fight their way through the large drifts, and each time I raised in the sled and saw the man in the parka with the wolf fur trim around the hood grab the leader by the back of the harness and help him through the bad part. Once I became sick and leaned over the side of the sled and was violently ill, and the dogs turned and came back to eat it, which made me sicker. They were an awful mess, tangled and piled on each other and fighting over the vomit. I was so weak that I couldn't stand. One of them was a large dog, named, of all things, Clarence, and he loved to fight. Of course, many of them do, but Clarence was so large and strong that when he fought, he could do serious damage, and he jumped on another dog named Yogi and started to kill him. He had Yogi by the throat, and I could do nothing, and the man was there again. The man with no name was there, and he smiled peacefully and quietly and untangled the dogs with his gentle competence and pulled them out straight and got them going again. Then stood back as we went by, and I tried once more to touch him, but could not. And again, we came to a place in the dark wind where the trail was gone. There had been a trail there when we went out, but a logging crew had gone through with a skidder, and the blade had taken the trail down to bare ice. It was a steep downhill grade, and I was not on the back of the sled where I could use the brakes. The sled began to creep up on the dogs, and as it did, it lost steering and turned sideways and rolled over. I was dumped into the side of a pine tree with gear and dog food, and the dogs balled up again in a horrible pile at the bottom of the hill. I couldn't see them well in the dark and tried to crawl to them, but everything was blurred, and the man came again, the friend. He lined the dogs out and put the gear back in the sled and set the snow hook so they couldn't run until he helped me back into the sled. Then he pulled a hook and put it into the sled, and I waved once more and thanked him. He ignored me and called to the dogs with a short sound, a word that sounded like an explosion in his mouth. Hacha! And the dogs took off again, running for him, and I went into the sleep unconsciousness once more. Somewhere there was a lake with bad ice, and the front end of the team picked their way across it, and somewhere we ran down a creek bed on the ice, and there was open water, and the dogs worked around it. I saw these things as if in a dream. We bounced off many trees, and I hit my head several times and was sick again, though the dogs kept going this time, and finally I remembered and saw nothing until I felt the sled was stopped dead. I opened my eyes and saw that we were in the kennel, and the dogs were rolling and scratching at their harnesses, waiting to be let out so that they could shake their legs and sleep in their houses. My wife came out and helped me. I was staggering and not being effective at putting them away, and I tried to tell her about the man, my new friend, but it all came out confused. So I stopped and thought I would tell her later, but I didn't, somehow, and did not speak of him or see the man, my new friend, again for a long time, until I had trained in Minnesota and gone north into Alaska to run the Iditarod and hit a place called the Burn. It is, of course, madness, a kind of channeled, focused madness, the Iditarod. The idea is that the musher will take a team and go from downtown Anchorage to downtown Nome, some 1,100 plus miles across the Alaska wilderness, over mountain ranges, up the Yukon River, out to the coast of the Bering Sea, and up along the coast and across parts of the sea ice to Nome. That is the idea. And on the face of it, with the world the way it is now, with planes and computers and cars with brains and comfort-controlled environments, and every single whim catered to by technology, with all of that, all that we have to become, it doesn't somehow seem possible to do something so basic and elemental. It is such a massive undertaking, such a logistical complication to train a team and take them up to Alaska and run the race. The only way to do it is break it down to simple, small units of time. The first run took 17 days and 14 hours, and it can be remembered best in days.